Thank you, Chris. So for those the select few who got to see the preview of this beforehand, sorry to repeat some slides, but so I'm Ben Rosinski. I'm an ag economist here at AFT. And so this little starter presentation I'm going to give you is supposed to be the kind of the transition from what Bianca was talking about before, about some of those barriers from that soil health, soil science perspective into the barriers from kind of the economic perspective. Um, and then Michelle Perez, our Water Initiative Director, will kind of introduce some of our work at AFT, and Archie Flanders from the Soil Health Institute will kind of go through their great work that they're doing. So to start off with, I thought it'd be a good idea to get kind of just a definition of what economics is, so everybody can get on the same page. So economics is the study of scarcity, study of how people use resources and respond to incentives, or really simply the study of decision making. So as you can see from that definition, economics is more than just kind of the profit or a farmer's bottom line. It's, to put it in the context of soil health practice adoption, it's all the factors that influence that farmer's decision whether to adopt or not. So this includes things, but not limited to, the short-term outcomes versus the long-term outcomes of the practice, the risk of success of that practice versus the risk profile of the farmer, the environmental benefits, and importantly, the farmer's personal and community values. Now, not all of these things are weighted equally, and they vary from farmer to farmer. So when we start thinking about some of those costs and benefits that a farmer is going to have to factor in when they make their decisions, I want to group them into these three categories, because a problem that happens in agricultural and environmental economics is that farmers pay for all of the costs of this practice adoption if there aren't incentive programs, but they don't get all of the benefits. They share those benefits. So we need to think about things in terms of the on-farm benefits and costs and the off-farm benefits. And to give you some examples, those on-farm private benefits that the farmer directly receives are things like the decreased labor costs from switching to no-till, or the erosion control, the yield benefits. Conversely, their on-farm costs that they are solely responsible for, the cost of new equipment, cover crop seeds, the effort and time they put into learning these practices, any risk associated with the practices. And then finally, there's benefits that we all receive as just members of the community, any water quality improvement or greenhouse gas reduction from these. Everybody in society gets the benefit from those. So when we look at these different categories, it's not as simple always as saying that on-farm benefits that the farmer decides just based off their on-farm and off-farm, or sorry, their on-farm benefits and their on-farm costs. Some of these off-farm benefits can kind of factor in too. And it goes to, I think, what Landon was saying before lunch about how, if you present farmers with some expert financial advice on why they should be adopting these cover crops or any kind of conservation practice, they might not still do that because there's a whole bunch of different things that they're factoring into their decision making. So if we look into the socioeconomic literature, we know there's a few characteristics that make farmers more likely to adopt conservation practices. So the first is farmers are already kind of environmentally conscious, or state that they're environmentally conscious. So the research shows that farmers are adopting these practices sometimes when those private costs outweigh the private benefits. And one reason for that is because these farmers could be more environmentally conscious, and so they're more likely to adopt these long-term practices. Another big factor is that long-term success versus the short-term focus. Farmers that are more focused on long-term sustainability, long-term profit, as opposed to getting that biggest yield increase for the next season's harvest, are more likely to adopt these conservation practices. And thirdly, and this one is especially for cover crops, is access to labor. For cash crop farmers, the fall harvest period is a very stressful, busy time. It's when they make all of their money pretty much. And to then ask a farmer to not only have to worry about harvesting their main crops, but then to plant in that same window of period is a big ask. And so farmers that have access to more labor are more likely to adopt cover crops. And then finally, take time to learn and take that initiative to learn. This is a long-term investment. It will take a lot of practice, trial and error, as Bianca said earlier, trying out, one field in cover crops or changing tillage in one part of your farm and taking those steps to adoption. And farmers that are willing to do that, they're more willing to kind of gradually come in and commit to soil health practices. So another type of economic study that offers us some insight into which farmers are more likely to adopt are some of these large surveys that go out each year. So the USDA, they do the ARM survey, the Agricultural Resource Management Survey. It's a massive national survey of farmers asking all types of production practice questions and outcomes. And then specifically just on cover crops, SARE, the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education, they release a national cover crop survey, I believe, every 2 years. So just wanted to tell you about some findings from those I think are really interesting. First, farmers that tend to that adopt cover crops tend to adopt other soil health practices too. From the ARM survey, we know that farmers that use cover crops are 2 to 3 times more likely to also use no-till. And the SARE survey kind of backs that up because 50% of their respondents that use cover crops also say they use no-till. The next point I want to make is that farmers don't necessarily need an incentive to adopt. According to USDA, only a third of all cover crop acres in the US are covered under an incentive program. And the SARE survey backs that up as well, with nearly 50% of respondents didn't receive an incentive. So what does this all mean and how can we use this research? First, spend some time looking for the right soil health curious farmer, the right farmer that's going to actually be interested in adopting these. And a couple tips: look for people that maybe have already started adopting conservation practices or have that positive outlook towards conservation. Also look for farmers that are really focused on that long-term success and not necessarily short-term, and that are willing to learn, that are willing to take that initiative to learn. And then finally, don't feel limited if you can't come to the table offering an incentive. Over the next couple of days, you're going to learn about great incentive programs that are happening. But if you don't have that information with you and you can't provide that to a farmer, that's all right. Farmers are adopting these practices even without incentives. And you might be able to offer them something like technical assistance. So with that, we are not having lunch anymore, but I'm going to pass it off to Michelle Perez.
Great. Hi, everybody. Let's see, I'm trying to show my video here. I'm Michelle Perez. I'm the Water Initiative Director and get to work with Ben and our other agricultural economists, Ellen Yateman, on a variety of soil health economic calculator tools and case studies. And I'm really thrilled to be here to help shed light on where all these case studies that are now co-branded with NRCS came from. And let me see if I can get my screen to share. Here we go. And the correct screen is this screen, hopefully. Are you seeing a PowerPoint presentation? All right, good. So as Ben alluded, he'll be making a repeat appearance a couple of times in this portion, and we get the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Archie Flanders, of Soil Health Institute. And we're here all to provide economic evidence on the investment in soil health, that it's worth it if you can overcome many different types of barriers that Bianca and Ben have alluded to when changing your management system. So, and I will try to move forward. So our session objectives, we have 3. We would love to teach you, easement participants, about the costs and benefits of soil health and how to use the following resources we've provided for you. We have 14 AFT-NRCS co-branded soil health economic case studies, and 4 of them are from your neck of the woods, 2 from Illinois, 2 from Ohio. We've got the Soil Health Institute's 100 Farms Soil Health Economics Report, and Archie is going to hone in on the Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois fact sheets. We have started amassing the economic literature behind soil health, and we're going to share some highlights with you. We want to encourage, like all the other speakers from AFT, to develop your collaborations, your working relationships with your local and state conservation professionals. We're not asking you to become one. We're gonna teach you how to act like one on TV, but finding those folks who know how to provide technical assistance, know how to provide financial assistance is key to helping you succeed with your farmer and landowner clients. And then third, hopefully we're going to inspire you to help us find a second FRPP-related soil health successful farmer, as we'd love to have more case studies focused on that group of folks. So here's our rundown. We're going to give about 15-minute talks. We're going to have 5 minutes of Q&A, and we are behind time, so we're going to go a little bit quicker. So where does all this come from? Well, we recognize the fact that there is a heck of a lot of good science out there supporting the water quality, water quantity, climate benefits of all of these soil health practices. But there was not a lot about 5 years ago economic evidence that these practices were worth taking risks and worth investing in. And so everyone and their mother wants to know. Farmers want to know, bankers want to know, corporations with sustainability programs want to know, or the private consulting community wants to know, what is this bottom line associated with soil health practice investments? And so back in 2017, 2018, we were able to put together a great project that was funded by the Conservation Innovation Grant that wanted to fill this gap. And we thought one way to do it was to tell individual farmer stories and quantify those economic and environmental benefits that farmers who have had a good long-term investment or a medium-term investment in soil health practices were willing to tell and share with us and let us quantify for them. And we used a variety of tools. We had to develop our own tool to make it easier for our fellow conservation staffers to conduct that economic analysis, and we used USDA's water quality and climate tools. And we summed it all up and packaged it into these beautiful, hopefully you think beautiful, compelling 2-page case studies, which I understand you all got in your packages, and they're all available online to download as well. So we'd like to share the wealth of knowledge we've created and empower our fellow conservation professionals to develop their own case studies featuring local soil health successful producers in their neck of the woods. Because our theory of change is that the more local evidence there is, the faster we get more farmers to say yes on more acres to soil health practice adoption. So what is this soil health successful farmer we're talking about? We have some criteria here. It's pretty simple. You know, it's a producer that has at least 4 years of successful adoption of soil health practices. And we're focused on row crops here, and there are more practices associated with almond orchards that we've studied. But it's no-till or reduced-till, it's cover crops, nutrient management, and conservation crop rotation. And they've done so on the majority of their acres. They're believers. They didn't just stick to, you know, just the back 40. They have positive stories to tell about the economic results. And given we have a before versus after analysis called partial budget analysis, which we'll go into, it's important that you compare before versus after years. And we, you know, farmers who adopted way long ago, super duper earlier adopters, greater than 15 years, that's already part of their baseline economic data. So we've decided to put a cap on featuring these soil health successful farmers. NRCS agreed to co-brand. We're so proud of it because they put us through some rigorous external review with their economists and their soil health specialists. And for that, we get their logo on our case studies, which increases hopefully the credibility and readability, widespread readership of these documents. There's 14 of them. Here they are. We have 3 California almond case studies, 2 Illinois corn soybeans, 2 Ohio corn soybeans, 4 diverse row crop farms featured in New York, 1 Pennsylvania corn soybeans, and 2 Oklahoma row crop case studies. And we are able to implement our idea to help others be authors. So with the Almond Board of California, we produced this one case study. With the Oklahoma Conservation Commission in the driver's seat as the authors, we produced this with them. And using the New York Dairy Farmer Business Summary, we're working on a new approach, a new methodological approach to these case studies. And Ben is the author of our first and only FRPP-related case study. Here's a sample look at the second page of it, and this is what a partial budget analysis table could look like. In the green, you have the positive economic effects of soil health practices, and in the red, you have the negative effects, and in the bottom, you have the net income effects and information on a per acre basis to make it comparable for most readers. We'll get into more details shortly. So here's our vision. These are options we've thought of to help you, FRPP easement professionals, when you want to talk to your landowners and farmers about soil health practice adoption. First and foremost, we're encouraging you to develop those key working relationships and then study up, prepare, to talk to them about these materials. So before you begin, if you don't already, many of you might, reach out to your local conservation professionals so that you can establish that strong working relationship with them. And the idea is you're going to introduce your landowners and farmers to them so they can do their job, which is providing conservation, technical, and financial assistance. And that does not have to become your job. You do not have to put on a new hat. Share these case studies, these fact sheets, these PowerPoints we're sharing with you today with them so that you can help expand their conservation toolbox if they don't already have these materials at the ready. And then encourage them, if they are so inclined, to find their own soil health successful farmer and feature them in their own local case study. And so before you go to actually talk to your FRPP related farmers and landowners, print out these materials, right? You're probably meeting in kitchen, in the kitchen table, you're out on the pickup truck, you're at a coffee shop. You can slide across the table these 2-page case studies, these slides and reports from Soil Health Institute, and a variety of different ways to talk to them about the case studies. So we're going to show you different options. It might not be just the case studies that you share. You could be approaching them with printouts of these 4 slides that we talk about, our summary reports I'm going to show you. You could print out 5 or 6 slides per farmer to share with them. And there's a 1 highlight slide. So if you don't want a lot of paper, you got one go at it and it's 1 slide. And there's a variety of other slides like the Soil Health Institute. So, and if you're giving group presentations, it's already in PowerPoint format. So there you go. All you have to do is change our names and put your name on it. We don't mind. This is why we created it for you. So here's an overview of the economic methods. And I do need someone to like coat rack me. I thought I was going to time myself. So if somebody wants to let me know how much time I've got, that would be great. So here are the economic. Say again, Ben?
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. I can do it. So what's a partial budget analysis? It's an economic analysis that estimates the effects before versus after a change in the benefits and the costs. And specifically, our studies focus on the cost of production before you adopted soil health practices compared to your cost of production after you adopted your soil health practices. And our case study authors use a 21-page questionnaire in Word to interview the farmer to obtain the information that then they take and insert into an Excel-based calculator that's got about 11 tabs. We use some national data sets for things. Otherwise, we're using farmer reported prices. And these are what we're studying, these primary effects of changes to machinery, fertilizers, pesticides, yields sometimes, and erosion repair and learning costs and other things. And you can learn more about that here. The methods for the environmental analysis, we use this really cool nutrient tracking tool, which you can find online if you haven't already used it already for water quality benefits, Comet Farm tool for greenhouse gases. And here are these summary findings. So of the 10 row crop farmers that we studied, 8 out of 10 of them reported an improvement in yield, while 2 reported no effect on yield. All 10 of them reported increases in income with this range from $4 to $56 per acre per year. All 10 of them said there was a positive return on investment to the tune of 7 to 343%. There's improvements and challenges in the effects on fertilizers. 5 farms reduced their costs, 3 farms saw no effect, and 2 farms increased their costs. In terms of machinery, fuel, labor, because of tillage changes, 9 farms reduced costs, 1 farm reported no change. Pesticide usage, 5 farms reported no change, 5 reported changes. Some increased their pesticide usage, some decreased it. And in terms of learning costs, there was a wide range of estimates of how much it took them to invest in learning how to use these practices. The water quality benefits, all of them said they saw actual improvements on their field in terms of soil runoff, in terms of water runoff. It lessened all of that. And the NTT tool estimated that nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment losses all went down between 50 and 75%. On the climate front, the Comet Farm tool estimated that significant reductions occurred to the tune of about 188% per farmer, with a big range in reductions. So here's this first FRPP case study. I'm definitely running out of time and forgot I wanted to do this. Here's the 1-slide approach. If you've got just one attempt. So you could say this family farm in Pennsylvania has an FRPP case easement on them, and they switched to no-till and added a rye cover crop. They were able to see an increase in both corn and soybean yields by 10%. They observed that. We helped them estimate that no-till saved them $32 per acre in reduced machinery and labor costs. And so this increase in net income from no-till and cover crops outweighed the increase in net costs, therefore leading to a total net income improvement of about $20 per acre, overall increasing their net income by $7,000, or a $20 per acre increase, and a 42% return on investment. This is how you would talk about this case study if you wanted to see it. We show that they are an FRPP benefiting family. It's a family farm, the first in their county to adopt 1999. And they really see these easements as a way to protect the farm from potential development, ensure that they will transfer ownership to their children. But they also saw it as a long-term outlook on soil health. They don't know what the farm will look like, but they know they need healthy soil to be successful. We included a picture of their preservation sign on their barn, and we signal that this is a Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program farmer. So help us find these farmers, contact Ben. They've got to have an FRPP easement, and they got to be soil health successful. To find the case studies, all you have to do is follow keyword search here in the green circle. AFT Soil Health Case Studies will get you there. You can find them on the NRCS website, NRCS Economic Case Studies. And if you want to, that was funny, I'll fix that. You can download the toolkit as well. So thank you so much. Please give us feedback. We're going to pop a link to our survey. It takes 4 minutes long, only 10 questions. Let us know which of these materials you're going to hear about today resonate with you. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing now.
All right, so I will pick back up. Hopefully you guys don't get too sick of me by the end of this, because I will be jumping in and out. So as Michelle kind of went over how AFT, we've done 10 row crop case studies. For those having been in the Midwest, and since this is a Midwest training, I thought I'd kind of focus on those 4 case studies and give you some highlights from them. So here are our 4 case studies, 2 from Illinois and 2 from Ohio. As you can see, they're all very similar on the front. And so when we talk about how to communicate with farmers about these case studies, if you can do it with one, you can probably do it with all of them because they follow the same kind of format. So to talk about some of the highlights from our 4 case studies, all 4 farms, the Thorndike Farm, the IFT Farm, the Lane Farm, and the Nehemiah Farm, are corn and soybean farms. 3 out of the 4 in our analysis have adopted some sort of conservation tillage. The 4th, the IFT Farm, they also do no-till on their farm, but they adopted way back in the early 90s, and so we didn't include that in our analysis. All 4 have changed their nutrient management system in some way, and all 4 have adopted cover crops. So some highlights of those 4 farms. I know Michelle went over kind of the highlights from across all of our case studies, but just looking at these 4 farms, their yields all have seen a yield increase ranging in about $14 in value per acre to $151. Fertilizer costs, 3 out of 4 have decreased their fertilizer costs. 3 out of 3, so all the farmers that have implemented the conservation tillage have reduced their tillage machinery costs. Learning costs on these farmers are ranging between 80 to 160 hours each year learning about these conservation practices. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of when I was talking earlier about that initiative to self-learn, how much time is required to put into just learning about the practices. Ultimately, though, they've all seen an increase in their bottom line. Net income has gone up by $23 to $59 per acre per year. And a little theme that you'll kind of hear throughout these talks, there's some trial and error. 3 out of 4 have tried multiple cover crop systems before landing on the one that's kind of brought them this success. Just as importantly as those economic changes, there's the environmental changes. All 3 have seen positive nitrogen decreases, positive phosphorus changes, positive sediment changes, and positive greenhouse gas changes from 35% all the way up to 494%. And important to note that the IFT farm has the kind of lowest percent changes out of all 4 of these farms, but remember they don't have tillage included in their analysis, so that's just the cover crops and nutrient management system. So I wanted to kind of go through with you a deep dive of how you would talk to a farmer about just one of our case studies. And I'll show you how I like to talk to farmers about the case studies. Maybe, this is something you could replicate with a farmer. So I'm going to pick the Thorndike Farm in Illinois and just give you a nice example. So here is the Thorndike family. Larry and Beth and their son Adam farm 2,600 acres in Ford County, Illinois. That's northern central Illinois, growing corn and soybeans. They only own 230 out of those 2,600 acres. So they're a great example of farmers that are putting in soil health practices on leased land. For our study, for our analysis, we look at 1,400 acre study area because that's the area they use under conservation tillage. The reasons for that and some of the hurdles that they face is that because they're renting land, sometimes the landowners don't want them to use conservation tillage for some of those social barriers that we've mentioned. And it can also be very difficult to transition some of that land into conservation tillage, so it might take some time. Their soil health kind of journey started in 2008 with strip till and no-till. 2011, they started adopting cover crops. And then in 2015, they switched to a new nutrient management system. Their resource concerns, erosion and improving the soil function. And just overall, because of these 3 changes, they've seen their annual net income increase by almost $50,000 a year, which is about $34 per acre in the study area. with an ROI of 129%. So some of the motivation that has got them starting to look at soil health practices. First, they see themselves kind of as early adopters, so they like to experiment. They like trying things out. They also saw, I think probably about 10, 15 years ago, they saw their margins, which were already slim, started to decrease. So they wanted to find ways to reduce inputs and those input costs while maintaining their same yield level. So Larry started going to conferences that focus on just that, on soil biology. And over that time, he's developed a motto. He likes to think of the soil like he thinks of his body. What you put into it is what you get out of it. So if you treat it well, it's going to treat you well. So to get into some of these economic effects, we're going to start with the positive effects first. They've seen a yield increase in their corn and soybean. So from the time they started adopting soil health practices, seen about a 15% increase in their yield. But for this study, we want to focus on just the change from soil health practices. And so since they've said that that 15% is from other things, not just soil health practices, it's from new seed varieties, changes in weather. They felt more comfortable going with this SAR, the cover crop survey that I mentioned. The national average is a 4% for soybeans and a 2% increase for corn. So that's what we have there that brings out to about $13 per acre change for them. They've also seen some decreases in costs. The biggest one is their savings from changing their nutrient management system. So they've converted to a fertilizer buggy that they apply fertilizer at the same time as their strip tilling. So this has let them cut their K and P in half, which saves them $66 per acre, and it also has a small machinery savings of about $275 an acre. As I mentioned, they've adopted conservation tillage. This has let them cut down one tractor pass from planting corn and from planting soybeans, and that equates to about $17 per acre. It's not all rosy though. They have increased some of their costs. They spend about 100 hours a year learning about soil health practices. Planting cover crops comes with a cost. They spend about $39 on seeds and also the planting where they use a Hagie spreader. They've also increased some of their pesticide usage because of their reduced tilling. But overall, those positive impacts of $60 per acre outweigh the cost of $26 an acre. And that's where you see this bottom line of a $34 per acre net income change, or a return on investment of 129%, which means that for every dollar they put in, they get that dollar back plus $1.29. So finally, I want to kind of leave with the barriers, because it's one of the nice things about these case studies is that we get to talk to the farmers and hear their story of adopting. So they've had a hard time finding that right cover crop mix in the system for them. They started using aerial seeder. They had poor application along the roadsides, and they found they weren't getting that good soil to seed contact. So then when they switched to a Hagie spreader for their rye cover crop, they had great success. And then the other one I kind of mentioned earlier was because they leased a lot of land, depending on who the previous operator was, they might not have left that soil in great shape. And it can take them a bit more time and a bit more effort to transition that land into conservation tillage. So that would be the kind of multi-slide, if you've got a little bit more time with the farmer, how I would do it. But if you only have 2 minutes, and you only have one thing to show them, you could just show them the highlights, which are by reducing tillage and adding cover crops and changing their nutrient management system, the Thorndikes could address their resource concerns and increase net income by $34 per acre. I think that's a headline that a lot of farmers are going to be curious to learn more about. And for them, one of the big things that stuck out was because they switched to strip till, could put the fertilizer directly in with the fertilizer buggy they use. So it's cut nutrient costs, and it's cut their machinery costs. So if you like how, we talked about those case studies, we've got a whole bunch of other slides for you. We've got the Ohio farmers, we give you the B&R farm from Pennsylvania. So it's they're all kind of set up the same way so that you can really talk about these different farms kind of interchangeably, just knowing a little bit about the context of their story. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen there, and if anybody has any quick questions before we move on to Archie and Soil Health Institute's great work, happy to answer them about AFT's case studies.
And while we wait for questions, Archie, would you go ahead and start sharing your screen? If there aren't any questions, and you can also type questions in the chat, Beth Frazier can clarify which chat, the Zoom chat or the Pathicals chat. We'll also have a training, a role-playing exercise with you later on, Friday morning, I believe. All right, well, Archie, why don't you take it away?
Okay.
Looks good.
All right, good. Well, thank you. I want to express my appreciation to the American Farmland Trust for this opportunity to join everyone and make this presentation today. We have a common goal, AFT and SHI, and that's to encourage farmers to adopt soil health practices. And Michelle mentioned a good word, it's evidence. And Ben and Michelle have already produced some evidence, and our presentation is going to be extended evidence of the profitability of farmers adopting soil health practices. When we say soil health, what exactly are we talking about? Number one, first question is, how do we know when the soil is healthy? And then how do we achieve soil health improvement? And then finally, do these practices improve soil health, also increase farm profitability? And we talk a lot about soil health, improving soil health, but it's not just a case that when you adopt these practices that good things happen to good people. Actually, the soil is a living organism, biological processes, chemical processes, and physical processes. And soil has characteristics that can be measured. And as you adopt these practices, the measurements will indicate improvements. And the one that most people are familiar with is soil organic carbon. As you adopt these practices, your soil organic carbon can increase, among other indicators. So as you adopt these practices, your soil health increases. And the factors that cause this can be measured. And on our website, we have more information about this, but this is just a list of some of the primary measurements. And we have principles of soil health. The first principle is to minimize soil disturbance. Of course, this is tillage, either adopt no-till or some form of reduced till. Another principle is to maximize biodiversity. This includes crop rotation, planting the cover crops, but also including livestock on crop acreage for grazing. The third principle is to maximize living roots. And this is planting of annual cover crops, but also potentially planting perennial crops such as alfalfa. And then the fourth principle is to maximize field cover or keep the soil covered. And this is accomplished with residue from reduced tillage, but also planting of cover crops. We, at the Soil Health Institute, we also conducted an interview process to collect information, and we did this in 9 states for 100 total farms, and we did this in collaboration with Cargill. And today we're going to talk about the results for 3 of these 9 states, Illinois, Iowa, and Michigan. Okay. Something happened. I lost
Indeed.
Maybe I accidentally, okay, there I'm back.
There you go.
Okay. Our analytical approach is called partial budget analysis. This compares the cost and benefits with and without adopting the soil health practice. And we have more information about our methodology at our website. And in partial budget analysis, we only include the factors that differ between conventional till and the soil health management system. And we calculate the benefits and the costs, and we take the difference, and this is the change in net farm income. Some examples of adopting soil health practice, what we mean, that we have examples for corn and soybean, just to give a conceptual idea of what it looks like. Both crops were eventually in conventional tillage. Of course, these, as you adopt no-till, these become decreased costs, which increase net farm income, so they're in the green. But also, as you adopt no-till practices, potentially you do have additional costs. In our example, we're getting rid of 3 tillage practices from conventional till, but when we go to no-till, we add 1 spray for herbicide to make up for the weed control. Another concept is adding cover crops to the no-till system. Typically, a farm adopts no-till or reduced till, and then later on, they come in and they start planting cover crops. So we see that when you go from no-till to cover crops, you do have an increase in cost. You have the cover crop seed, planting the seed, but and then also terminating the cover crop. In this example, the same spray that you use to terminate the cover crop was also be used in no-till for weed control. And then finally, after extended years of no-till and cover crops, potentially other things happen. You have the reduced cost of tillage, but also in many cases you get increased weed suppression. So you're able to eliminate 1 additional herbicide spray for weed management. Sometimes you have nutrient cycling, and potentially you could decrease the amount of applied nitrogen in corn. Also, sometimes you are able to reduce your P and K applications. And then finally, in many cases, after extended use of these practices, you do have increase in yield. So it takes generally many years. It doesn't happen all at once, but when you adopt no-till and cover crops, you have extended potential for decreased costs, but also increased revenue from increased yield. Now, to go in and let's take a look at the 3 states where we did the analysis. First, okay. The first is Illinois. To give some idea, these were full-scale farms, average acreage between corn, soybean, and wheat, which includes double crop wheat, was 934 acres. So these aren't just small farms that we were looking at. These practices can be applied at full-scale production. In Iowa, the farms are a little bit larger, but still, these are full-scale farms of corn and soybeans, average farm size 2,125 acres. And then finally, Michigan, total farm size 1,263 acres. These are primarily corn and soybean farms. Some of them did have additional crops. When we interviewed the farmers, we had some idea of what their production practices were compared to other farmers in the state and also in the US. In the Illinois farms, 74% of the acreage was in no-till production. This compares to the state of Illinois, 29%, and US average is 37% of the acreage. We go ahead and add it to reduced till. 26% of the acres were reduced till in Illinois. In Illinois as a state, it was 43%. And then in the US, 35% of acreage is in reduced till. None of our farms were in any type of intensive till in Illinois. 28% were in intensive till, and that's equal to the US average. The cover crop acreage percentage is the big difference. 71% of the acreage in our sample in Illinois had cover crops. In the state of Illinois, only 3% of the acreage has cover crops. And in the US, it's 5%. So if we take a look at, let's say the US with no-till and reduced till, 37 plus 35, we already see that we have a good amount of adoption of the no-till and reduced till practices, conservation type tillage practices. Only 28% is in intensive till in the US, but cover crop acreage is the acreage that's lagging behind. Adoption of cover crops is far behind adoption of conservation practices. Similar results for Iowa farms. 83% in our sample was no-till. 17% was reduced till. And again, none was an intensive till. These numbers compare to the state of Iowa and also the US. Then again, cover crops. Our sample farmers had much greater adoption of cover crops than either the Iowa or the US. And then finally, Michigan, 89% of the acreage was in no-till. The balance of it, 11% was in reduced till. Again, no intensive till. But then finally, cover crop acreage again in Michigan, the percentage is 83 versus 11% for the state as a whole, and then again 5% for the US. So all three states in our sample, we have great adoption of cover crops, but in the state as a whole, in the US as a whole, cover crop acreage is not very widespread. Now, these are the partial budget results for Illinois, the 11 farms in Illinois. Reduced expenses are in green, additional expenses are in red. This is for corn and soybean. The first category is seed. We see the additional expenses of $22.30 for corn and $17.80 for soybeans. This is the average of the seed. This is average over the whole sample and includes the cover crop seed. Fertilizer and amendments. We see that for corn, the reduction was $28.91. For soybean, $12.20. Typically, you see a reduction in fertilizers greater than for corn than for soybean because corn has nitrogen applied to it. So after extended years of this, you have more opportunity to expand your decrease in fertilizer because of decreases in nitrogen. Decreases of fuel, electricity, and labor is $10.99 for labor for corn, $3.27 for fuel. In this example, there won't be electricity. Electricity would be if you had an irrigation system with electric pumps. So this is all fuel. And then we also have greater reductions for soybeans. If you add the labor and fuel, $13 for soybean versus, well, almost about the same for soybeans. But going on down, we see that the total expenses for corn will reduce $80.16. Additional expenses, $63.28. And then similarly for soybeans, the reduced expenses are greater than the additional expenses. In our sample in all these states, about half of the farms reported a yield increase that was attributable to adopting the soil health management system. For corn, it averaged 5.27 bushels. For soybeans, it averaged 2.18. So you put long-term prices to each one of these, we see an increase in revenue of $22.24 for corn and $22.30 for soybeans. So then net on the bottom line, the change in net farm income is an increase for corn of $39.12 and for soybeans, $37.56. So again, like our previous examples, we do see increase in net farm income from adopting these practices. So the next state is Iowa. We have similar results for Iowa that we had for Illinois. A reduction in fertilizer For corn only, we did have some increase for soybean. Reduction of labor and services is $9.52 for corn, $11.46 for soybean. Then again, the equipment ownership, this is reduced time through the field. We put a per acre rate to this, so you have decreases in expenses for equipment for corn and soybeans. And then again, increase in revenue. We have a revenue increase for corn, $45.78, soybeans, $26.26. And then finally, the bottom line is another increase in net farm income from adopting these practices, $63.85 for corn, $36.79 for soybean. And then finally, we have the similar results for Michigan. Decrease in fertilizer expenses for both crops. Decreases in labor, fuel for both crops. Decrease in equipment ownership expenses for both crops. Yield increases that average 2.3 bushels for corn, 1.8 bushel for soybean, for a revenue increase of $9.66 for corn, $18 increase for soybean. Now let's notice that in Michigan, we did have 2 states for corn that reported a yield decrease. So this is reduced revenue due to adopting the soil health management system. But still, for the state as a whole, the change in net farm income is $24.74 increase. And then for soybean, it was increase of $38.38. So for all 3 states, we see that the change in net farm income is positive from adopting soil health management systems. So as a summary, we can say that U.S. farmers could increase net farm income by adopting soil health management systems, reducing tillage and planting cover crops. Eliminating tillage has an immediate benefit of reducing equipment-related expenses. Long-term benefits are greater than additional expenses when you do plant cover crops. Remember in our example, typically a farm goes to no-till, reduced till, and that's going to be a reduced cost because you actually stop doing something. But when you add cover crops, you do take on additional costs, and the benefits for this are usually long-term, additions in reduced expenses, and then potentially increases in yield. So the question is, how many transition years are required to realize these increases in net farm income? As of right now, we don't have a firm answer for that, but future work that we're looking at will attempt to investigate this. The full presentations for these states, these 3 states, and all of them are available at our website. We have fact sheets posted for these, so you could review them in more detail there.
Thank you, Archie. That was fantastic and pretty much right on time. So thank you. While we transition, Ben, you can pull up your slides, and we do have some times for questions. So don't hesitate to ask questions of all 3 of us now that you've seen several presentations, and we have questions available, time for questions at the end too.
So this is a PowerPoint presentation Michelle and I have put together called Amassing the Economic Evidence on Soil Health. And the goal of this is to kind of place where this work that we've been doing at AFT with our case studies, kind of the work that Archie just laid out for you, that the Soil Health Institute has been doing, within the context of all the other great work on the soil health economics that's out there. Because I think it's important, because different types of evidence are going to click with different farmers. And so if you have a general feel for what's out there, you might be able to suggest something to a farmer that might really get them thinking in a new positive light about these practices. So the goal is to kind of run through some of this research and then talk about how you might be able to use this with farmers. So first, just want to start with two key themes that I think about a lot when kind of going through this research. First is that timing matters, and to think long term. Farmers aren't just going to look at the overall costs and the overall benefits because, as Archie really pointed out in there, there's upfront costs, and we're not always sure when the benefits to some of these practices like cover crops are going to fully vest and fully come in. And so you have to have that long-term thinking approach. And the second point is just how I was talking about how every farmer is unique. Also, every one of these practices is unique. There's not a magic bullet for what cover crop system every farmer that you talk to is going to need to use. And that's where it takes somebody that's willing to learn, willing to experiment, and has that long-term thinking to find that successful farmer. So the goal of this presentation is to think about what does this mean for adoption. So to do that, I'm going to go through three types of kind of economic analysis. First, budget analysis, then research trials, and finally surveys, and show how you might be able to use that information with farmers. So this first group, you've already been introduced to it. I'm going to call them budget analysis. I would put the stuff that AFT is doing with our PBA work, the great work that Archie is doing at the Soil Health Institute, into this category. And they focus on those private costs and the private benefits. And they tell the farmer's story. They focus on actual farms, the challenges that they face, and the real world results that they attain. I think they're great for farmers that want that real story, that want to hear from people that operate in the same way they do. And so if that's what your farmer's looking at, show them the AFT case studies, show them those SHI fact sheets, but then also show them stuff like this from the National Association of Conservation Districts. They have this great series of case studies, and I'm going to link all of these in the end of the slide so you can find everything if you want them. So they've focused on, they have 3 farmers in the Midwest focused on adopting cover crops. They track the costs and the changes in revenue. So the first 2 of the farms, you can see, saw positive changes in net income over the timeline, whereas the final farm did not over that 3 to 4 year timeline. And so the first farm, you can see, starts off in the negative, and then over time, about the 3rd year, they were able to get a positive net income change. The second starts off in the positive, then the 3rd year, you can see their results are starting to slip a little bit, and then they rebound. And then finally, the last farmer, they just struggled with finding that cover crop combination, and they never got positive results in that 3-year time frame that they were working with the researchers. But importantly, they said at the end of it, they're going to keep at it because they believe in the practice. They believe that this is a long-term investment. Another similar budget analysis, marginal analysis, is by the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. They've got 2 series of case studies that are really interesting. First is with 3-row crop farmers in the Midwest. They use a full farm enterprise, which is a little bit different than the PBA analysis that Archie was mentioning. This looks at not just what's changing, but everything happening on the farm. So when they break down the results for these case studies, they break it down by production, by their crop. So for corn, soybeans, and sorghum, they find positive results for all farmers, but the wheat results are inconclusive. And they attribute this to the main reasons for positive results as that decrease in fuel, labor, and equipment. The second series they have is on small mixed production farm systems in North Carolina. It's looking at climate resilient practices, but a lot of soil health practices fall under that. And they also show positive results. And this is great because they're looking at smaller diversified crop rotation type farms, vegetable production, livestock. So this might not be as pertinent for the Midwest, but if you do have some of these smaller farms, these are great resources to share with them because so much out there is on large row crop producers. And then finally, from Iowa State, Plastina et al., they came up with a PBA focus group approach for Midwest farmers, talking about the costs and benefits of cover crops. And overall, they find a negative result, saying the net income or net revenue is decreased compared to non-cover crop fields. But in those focus groups, when they started talking to the farmers, a lot of them said that they're going to continue because they see some of those non-monetized benefits, such as erosion control, and they believe in the long-term success of cover crops. So the next kind of group that I want to talk about is research fields, research trials. And there's a few that I want to call your attention to. The first here by, before I get into the actual trials, one of the things that is nice about these research trials is that they control for everything. And so some farmers, they look at case studies and say, this is great, but I want to know what's happening without all of the farmer interference. In an ideal world, what's going to happen. And so that's what these trials do. They kind of can control for a lot of things that you can't control for on a working farm. So the first I want to bring your attention to by Kai et al. is a study from Missouri. And they focus on cover crops. They find that cover crop yields went up for corn about 1.5 bushels per acre and soybeans by about 18 bushels per acre. But with that, and that was over 4 years, but it was not until the fourth year that the revenue was actually higher in the treatment field. So it takes a while for these practices to sink in. For this one, took to the fourth year, which matches what a lot of the other research is saying. And then finally, from Sanju et al., they tried different types of cover crops with tomato farms. And this goes into that notion that you have to find the right cover crop mix. Because when they tried rye, they got no yield impact. But with hairy fetch and crimson clover, they got 2 times the yield impact for tomatoes. So the final group that I want to talk to you about is surveys. Surveys have a special place in my heart. I love them. But they give that big bird's eye view, the big trends. They're for the farmer that says, yeah, that's just one person's story. I need to know what's happening kind of with everybody. And so if that's the farmer that you want to talk to, I mentioned the 2 kind of big surveys in this space earlier, the USDA ARM survey and the SARE cover crop survey. So just focusing on the SARE cover crop survey, they sample almost 1,200 farmers every other year. So among horticulture farmers, they found half reported an increase in profits from adopting cover crops, and only 3.8% found a decrease in profits because of cover crops. For corn farmers, in these self-reported yields from fields that had cover crops, they found an increase of 2% or 3.5 bushels for corn, and 5% and 2.6 bushels for soybeans. And importantly, corn farmers decreased their fertilizer usage by about 50%, and soybean producers decreased their fertilizer by about 40%. So not only are you seeing a yield increase, you're seeing that drop in input costs, which is huge. And these farmers are, on average, they've been doing cover crops for, I think 75% of them have been doing it for over 40 years. So they've probably kind of vetted in these processes. They've kind of worked through them. So we don't know exactly what year, if they're at year 1 or year 10. But luckily, a few years ago, back in 2015, 2016, Sarah did a further in-depth economic analysis, and they kind of tracked these results from year 1, year 3, and year 5. And you can see the table of the yield changes throughout. So in year 1, you saw for corn a slight bump increase in the yield of about 0.5%, and for soybeans about 2%. That increased in year 3 after adopting cover crops to 1.75%, 3.54% for soybeans. And then finally in year 5, you saw a 3% increase in yield for corn and almost a 5% increase in yield for soybeans. But these increases in yield didn't instantly mean a decrease or an increase in net revenue. In year 1, the average net returns for corn were negative at negative $31 per acre and negative $23 an acre for soybean. In year 3, they were about zero for both corn and soybean. It wasn't until year 5 where you saw an $18 per average increase for corn and a $10 per average increase for soybean. So it took some time for these practices to become really profitable. And that's a really good point to kind of hammer home to farmers, to let them know this is a long-term investment. So what does this all mean? There are a whole bunch of different types of economic information out there. And each farmer is probably going to be looking for a certain type of information, something that really makes them see the positive news about soil health practices. So just knowing a little bit about what's out there means you can tailor your approach to a farmer based off of what they're kind of telling you. So if they're telling you, I want stories about fellow farmers, look for some of these case studies, some of these PBA analysis that we put out there, that Archie's put out there, that DAT2 or EDF has. If they want something from the top universities doing research, controlled trials, we put a couple examples of that in here as well. And then if they say, well, that's just one farmer, that's just one research trial, I need to know what's happening with thousands of people, point them to the cover crop survey. So hopefully we've kind of given you different approaches to tackle tough questions from any farmer out there. So with that, I think that's kind of the conclusion of our economics section. So we're happy to take questions for another few minutes if anybody has any.
I get a lot of pushback about if we do give up, I would say, some maturity on corn, or we give up a little bit of yield. It doesn't make sense because of the way that current crop insurance works, that keeping up your base yield is going to be more lucrative in the end than profitability. And so profitability doesn't matter if you're giving up base yields. And I'm curious if anyone has anything helpful for me on that one.
I do not. Bianca has chatted about this in the past, and I don't know if she's half listening and heard that question. She could speak up, but Archie, Ben?
I would say I did show examples of 2 farmers in Michigan had a yield decrease, but generally from this work and the other work that we have done, yield decreases do not result from adopting these practices.
Sure, I should clarify. A lot of times I'm working with livestock producers that are sometimes going to give up some yield because they're going to wait and take a cover crop for forage. And they're okay with that, but I'm just saying that the way our insurance system is set up, that's really messed up. And it would be nice if we could not just promote yield and try to, I'm just saying it's something to work on because it is a problem. And sometimes they're giving up yield on purpose, but they're realizing that there's a price to that when it comes to their insurance check at the end of the year.
There's definitely still work to be done on insurance. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that there is this, and there's been this system of pushing yield over kind of profitability for a long time, and it impacts a lot of different decisions that farmers make. And, you know, that's a great example of where that comes in. And it comes in a few other different places too. Bianca, did you?
Yeah, tell me more, Marie. So these are systems where they're giving up on yield for their corn crop, but instead they're getting cover crop to feed?
Okay. To be fair, like I do a lot of work. We are, I'm I work with a lot of very innovative farmers that are planting green, and they are interseeding corn crops. I mean, this is kind of like beyond just like throwing some rye in after soybeans, right? These are very integrated systems. And I will say that there are years that when you plant corn into standing 24-inch rye, we see a little drop. However, they are seeing some other benefits throughout the year. I'm just saying that it is a stumbling point with producers. I understand that you're saying that we're not seeing drops in yield, but I do think as you get to the next level of cover crops, I am not talking about rye after beans that's terminated before you put in your next corn crop. We're talking about roller crimping, waiting to plant, things like that, that there are yield reductions, but it's too bad that because of the way insurance is set up through USDA, that we can't promote profitability over yield, because I could get more people to probably go the next step with some of these covers by planting green, using multi-species, deferring to maybe a shorter day corn. But because of that problem, that glitch within our insurance system, it's an argument that I don't have, there's nothing I can argue against that. I mean, it's real.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, insurance is something that, you know, we made some progress on that while I was at NRCS. We were able to at least get them to acknowledge cover crops as a best management practice. So that at least allowed there to be an upfront, yes, you are actually insured if you're planting cover crops, rather than determining that at the end. That's progress, but there's more needed. I understand that there is still work ongoing to get more into how do we transition producers and how do we incentivize them transitioning. But yeah, those problems are there. I would hope that for a producer, ultimately their bottom line matters and their resilience. And so maybe in terms of the messaging, building that resilience so that when they get that downpour, if they're able to plant green, they're more likely to make it through, because that green cover crop is going to be drying their soils out, and they're not going to have to get in there and terminate first and then wait for a while. And talking about those resilience type benefits may help, but you're right.
Yeah.
There are those insurance hurdles.
It does.
Yeah.
It
Marie,
totally
so
helps.
I just want to echo, Chris has a great point. Marie, I know that Max Webster out of our Illinois office does work on RMA issues and cover crop insurance. So I'm going to ask if I can share the snippet of this recording with him, and then he may be able to provide a written response, or maybe we can have him join at over the next couple of days to chat about this. Just trying to be mindful of time and others. We have 3 more minutes. Are there more questions that we could try to tackle? And also just let you know that in the Pathables chat, I did put a link if you all want to go to it and click on it. And then whenever you can find 4 minutes today or tomorrow, answer those 10 questions and give us feedback on what of all the things we showed you today, what resonated with you? What might you use one-on-one with farmers or in front of groups with farmers? We'd love to know.
I was just interested in this go round in understanding that it's not as simple, like in 2 years you are going to see a profit. Like there's a time horizon, right, that's different for every farm. And I'm just wondering, for those folks who are on the front lines and having a conversation with either a landowner or a producer, of how to message that particular piece of it, in terms of the sort of the studies are not all over the map, but they show different results over a different time horizon. And how do you communicate that? Like, is there something that is going to changes that are going to make it faster in terms of profitability. So I'm just sort of curious on that front.
The quick answer is, combining no-till with cover crops is a win-win solution, and or preceding cover crops with an investment in reducing tillage will certainly immediately give you that economic benefit, because you're investing, there's an upfront cost to change your conventional drill to a no-till drill. But with that, you'll see, numbers of passes across the field drop from 5 to 7 passes to 2 to 3, depending on the crop. You'll see your diesel fuel costs immediately drop, right? And your time, farmers need to recognize and value their time that they can spend investing back on the farm operation or with family, friends, or other pursuits. So all of those are immediate economic benefits from a change in tillage that can be then shared over with that spike in cover crop seeds, the equipment to plant cover crops, the termination costs, and a lot of people hire out. So that is a big upfront cost for investing in cover crops that could be paid for by the switch to no-till. Nutrient management's a little bit of a wild card. Folks can take it upon themselves to review how they're doing against the university findings, against research trials, against fellow farmers, against, the famous, Gabe Browns of the soil health world, and they could choose to reduce their NP applications right away, or they could choose to see that there's improved fertility occurring in the soil because of that cover crop investment, because of that greater residue from the tillage. So that's a medium term, or either an immediate choice farmers could make to see those reductions in fertilizers, or it's a medium to longer term reflection of seeing willingness to take a risk to reduce it because you're seeing increased fertility. So that was my commentary on short, medium, and long-term benefits.
That's helpful. That's very helpful.
And just to add one quick point to that, Chris, is that though, yes, there is that varying horizon of timeline, especially for cover crop adoption, the studies are coming out that the results are positive when you do finally get there. And, on average, that's looking at maybe 4 to 5 years. And Archie's right. He said at the end of his that we need more research on when that's kind of coming on average. But you'll see, the SARE cover crop survey says after 4 years that on average these farmers are making, are turning profitable. So yes, you can't guarantee, but you can say best of our research on average, they're going to be after a few years.
Gotcha.
In addition to those short-term and medium-term benefits, there's one number you could use to prepare people for the long-term. And that is that there's a pretty standard number for increasing organic matter, and that's 0.1% per year from adopting these practices. So even some of these things do happen, but there are even more things beneficial to profit that happen even in the longer term. But it takes a long time for some of them to happen by increasing organic matter. It's just a slow process to do that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you guys.